Good morning. Today we are reading the sixth book in the Left Behind series, and this book is called Assassins. Today I'll be reading chapter 9. Buck apologized profusely to Tyson, explaining, Rayford and Leah went to her place to get something and just now called to tell us to look out the window. Tyson, his hair wild, pulled on a rope and followed Buck downstairs. Chloe, holding Kenny, stood before the window facing west. Maybe we need the lights off, she said. I see nothing. What are we looking for? Tyson said. The 200 million horsemen, she said. Tyson rushed to the front of the house and pulled back the curtain. I would not be disappointed if God moved up the glorious appearing a few years, he said. Must be cloudy. No stars. Where is the moon? Back here, Buck said. I cannot imagine Rayford was serious, Tyson said, rejoining Buck and Chloe. He was excited, Chloe said. Scared even. Buck moseyed out the back door and looked east where the horizon glowed red. Wonder if this is it, he called out. Something is burning somewhere, Tyson said wearily. But isn't Mrs. Rose's home in the other direction? I ought to drive that way and see what I can see, Buck said. It was clear Chloe didn't like that idea. Let's wait and see. It's not worth the risk if it's just a fire. The phone rang. Chloe handed the fussing Kenny to Buck and hurried to get it. No, Dad, she said. Maybe fire's in the east. Are you sure it's begun? Here, talk to Tyson. As soon as Mac unlatched the cockpit door, Leon barged in, disheveled, swearing. A little turbulence, Mac said. Turbulence? What's with the smoke? The smell? I've got a man down, and Carl says one of his people is unconscious. We've got to land, man. We're going to suffocate, and you're bleeding. Mac followed him into the lounge where one of Leon's aides frantically pumped the chest of the other. Carl screamed from the galley. We're all going to die. Leon covered his own mouth with a handkerchief, gagging and coughing. Sulfur. Where's that coming from? That's poison, isn't it? Won't it kill us? Mac smelled nothing. He would check the control panel, but the Condor had super-sensitive smoke and fume alarms, none of which had engaged. Mac knew he'd look suspicious if he were not also suffering. He covered his mouth. I'll turn up the ventilation system, he said, as Carl dragged his fallen worker from the galley. Get those two into the sleeping quarters. There are enough oxygen canisters for everyone. Isn't there somewhere we can land? Leon said. I'll find out, Mac said. Hurry. He rushed back into the cockpit and locked the door. What's going on? Abdullah said. You're losing a lot of blood. I'm all right, Mac said. Those horses have power up here. Even inside a pressurized cabin, everybody smells sulfur. They're gagging, using oxygen, passing out. Leon wants us to land. We should go straight on to Johannesburg, Abdullah said, working with Mac to check every gauge. What is affecting them is not coming from this plane. They'd be no better off on the ground. They could get medical treatment. Abdullah looked at Mac. So could you. But if they are being plagued by the 200 million horsemen, no medicine will save them. What's our ETA? Several hours. Mac shook his head, his wounds making him wince. We're going to have to put down, or Leon is going to find out we're invulnerable. Abdullah pointed to the controls. Mac took over, and Abdullah pulled charts from his flight bag. They will be here any minute, Tyson said, hanging up from Rayford. The plagues of fire, smoke, and sulfur have begun. I did not expect this, but the horsemen are visible, at least to some. Rayford and Mrs. Rose saw them, and unbelievers are being slain. Buck turned on the television. Mayday, Mayday, Mac heard over the radio. This is Condor, go ahead. Mayday, my pilot is dead. I'm choking. Cockpit full of smoke. Ah, the smell. I can't see. We're losing it. Going down. What's your location? But all Mac heard was the unnerving wailing. This was like the day of the rapture, only now it was unbelieving pilots whose planes would be lost. Maybe a third of them. Mayday calls filled the frequency. Mac was helpless. He was also lightheaded. He switched to a news radio feed. No one has an answer yet to the puzzling rash of fires, outbreaks of smoke, and noxious sulfur-smelling emissions killing thousands all over the globe, the newsman said. Emergency medical professionals are at a loss, frantic to determine the cause. Here's the head of the Global Community Emergency Management Association, Dr. Jurgen Hayes. If this were isolated, we might attribute to a natural disaster, a rupture of some natural gas source. But it seems random, and clearly the fumes are lethal. We urge citizens to use gas masks and work together to extinguish spontaneous fires. The newsman asked, which is more dangerous, the black smoke or the yellow? He said, first, we believe the black smoke emanated from the fires, but it appears to be independent. It can be deadly, but the yellow smells of sulfur and has the power to kill instantly. The reporter said he had just been handed a bulletin and he sounded terrified. While there are pockets in which no fire or smoke or sulfur have been reported in other areas, the death count is staggering, now estimated in the hundreds of thousands. His Excellency, Global Community Potent Nikolai Carpathia, will address the world via radio and television and the internet inside the half hour. Abdullah shoved a map under Mac's nose. We are equidistant from airports that can handle a heavy in both Addis Ababa and Khartoum. It's up to Leon, Mac said. He's the one who wants to land. Abdullah took over again, and Mac emerged from cockpit to find Leon on the phone. Mac grabbed a cloth napkin from the gallery, soaked it, and held it to his ear. He tossed another damp cloth into the cockpit so Abdullah could wipe down the window and panel. One moment, Excellency, Leon said. The captain needs me. Yes, I'll ask. Leon covered the phone. His Excellency asked where we are. Over the Red Sea. We can either... Leon held up a hand to silence Mac and told Carpathia. He handed the phone to Mac. The Potentate wishes to speak with you. What is your plan, Captain? Mac told him the options. Can you not turn back to either Mecca or somewhere in Yemen? They have no strip that will handle a craft this large, sir. Addis Ababa is in what used to be Ethiopia. Carpathia said as if to himself. Correct, Mac said. Khartoum is in Old Sudan. Go there. I will contact Potentate Rehoboth in Johannesburg and have him ensure that his people in Sudan extend every courtesy. If you are then able to complete this journey, it will be very beneficial to the cause. May I ask how things are there? Here, we have lost dozens, and the stench is abominable. I am convinced this is chemical warfare, but it will not surprise me if the opposition claims some supernatural source. Me either, sir. The Jerusalem twosome are already carrying on about it. Sir, my new name for them. You like it? Mac did not respond. People were dying all over the world, and Carpathia was playing word games. They are, of course, taking credit for what is happening, Carpathia said. That makes my job easier. Their day will come, and the world will thank me. Buck sat in front of the TV with Tyson and Chloe, waiting for Rayford and Leah. From countries in daylight came images of fire and billowing smoke, people gagging, gasping, coughing, falling, panic. The phone rang. It was Mac calling for Rayford. Buck filled him in and was stunned to hear Mac and Abdullah's account. Mac told him of Carpathia's nickname for the two witnesses. He's about to come on TV, Buck said. I'll have Rayford call you. Rayford and Leah pulled in as Carpathia was being introduced. The stateside tribulation force sat before the TV watching cosmic history. Tyson stood and paced as Carpathia solemnly looked into the camera. The potentate was at his typically parental best, assuring the horrified masses that the situation would soon be under control. We have mobilized every resource. Meanwhile, I asked the citizens of the global community to report suspicious activity, particularly the manufacture or transport of noxious agents. Sadly, we have reason to believe that the massacre of innocent lives is being perpetrated by religious descendants to whom we have extended every courtesy. Though they cross us at every turn, we have defended their right to dissent. Yet they continue to see the global community as an enemy. They feel they have a right to maintain an intolerant, closed-minded cult that excludes anyone who disagrees. You have the right to live healthy, peaceful, and free. While I shall remain always a pacifist, I pledge to rid the world of this cult, beginning with the Jerusalem twosome, who even now express no remorse about the widespread loss of life that has resulted from this attack. You know, Tyson said, sitting on the arm of the couch next to Chloe, I am going to have to ask forgiveness for the glee I will feel when this man's due time arrives. Carpathia pushed a button that showed Eli and Moshe holding forth at the Wailing Wall. They spoke in unison in a loud, haunting, echoing tone that carried without amplification far across the Temple Mount. The words flashed across the screen. Woe to the enemies of the Most High God, they said. Woe to the cowards who shake their fist at their Creator and are now forced to flee his wrath. We beseech you, snakes and vipers, to see even this plague as more than judgment. Yeah, it is yet another attempt to reach you by a loving God who has run out of patience. There is no more time to woo you. You must hearken to his call. See that it is he who loves you. Turn to the God of your fathers while there is still time, for the day will come when time shall be no more. Carpathia came back into view with a condescending smile. The day will come, my friends, when these two shall no longer disseminate their venom. They shall no longer turn water to blood, hold back rain from the clouds, send plagues to the Holy Land and the rest of the globe. I upheld my end of the bargain negotiated with them months ago, allowing certain descendants to go unpunished. Here is my reward. Here is how we are repaid for our largesse. But the gift train stops here, loyal citizens. Your patience and steadfastness shall be recompensed. The day will come when we live as one world, one faith, one family of man. We shall live in a utopia of peace and harmony with no more war, no more bloodshed, no more death. In the meantime, please accept my deepest personal condolences over the loss of your loved ones. They shall not have died in vain. Continue to trust in the ideas of the global community, in the tenets of peace, and in the genius of an all-inclusive universal faith that welcomes the devout of any religion, even that of those who now oppose us. Just 4 months from now, we shall celebrate in the very city where the preachers now taunt and warn us. We shall applaud their demise and reveal in a future without plague and disease and suffering and death. Keep the faith and look forward to that day. And until I address you again, thank you for your loyal support of the global community. The ultimate in medical technology was housed in 2 fully equipped ambulances that waited at the end of the primary runway in Kortum. With the wet cloth still pressed against his left ear, Mac helped Abdullah open the door and lower the stairs as Leon and Carl staggered out, each with a failing aide in tow and each leaving a dying comrade aboard. Emergency medical technicians, gloved and gas masked, hurried aboard, lugging metal boxes. Mac and Abdullah stood on the tarmac, refusing assistance until everybody else was attended to. The other four were treated in the ambulances, and soon the EMT deplaned, then reboarded with gurneys. They emerged with both victims covered head to toe with sheets. Fortunato stood sans suit coat outside an ambulance, tie loose, shirt sweat drenched. He wiped his brow, breathing heavily. Precautionary? He asked the EMTs as the victims rolled by. They shook their heads. They aren't. Yes, they are, one said, asphyxiated. Leon turned to Mac. Get that wound taken care of and have the plane thoroughly checked out. We can't have another episode like that. Mac had 3 puncture wounds in his scalp, a deep laceration in his neck that required 20 stitches, and a nearly severed ear requiring 40 more. That's going to smart something awful when the painkiller wears off, he was told. 2 young people were dead, 4 other passengers deadly ill, and the world in chaos. Mac decided he could live with pain. Rayford sat in the living room at the safe house in the wee hours as the others drifted back to their beds. He had limped into the house behind Leah, wet, cold, and aching all over. After having run into her at full speed, he could only imagine her pain. The immediate concern and attention of the others, even during the broadcast of Carpathia's address, wounded him in its sweetness. Truly, they were brothers and sisters in Christ, and there would be no surviving without them. After they heard Rayford and Leah's story and thanked God for the provision of the money, Tyson had shared a little of what he would transmit the next day. He seemed especially intrigued that believers could see the horses and horsemen, while the victims could not. Even on camera, people were shown recoiling from snake bites, enveloped by clouds of smoke, and consumed, seemingly, by spontaneous fire from thin air. I had envisioned the horsemen as one vast army riding together, Tyson said, and perhaps at some point they will, but so far it appears they are assigned to various locations. How long this will continue, I do not know. Frankly, I am disappointed to not have seen them yet myself. Eventually, Rayford and Chloe were the only ones left in the living room. Going to bed, Dad? She said at last. In a while. Just need to unwind. Unique day, you know. Never saw anything like that before. Don't care to again. She moved around behind him and massaged his neck and shoulders. You need rest, she told him. I know. He patted her hand. I'll be all right. You get your sleep so you can take care of that baby. As he sat in the darkness, Rayford ran through the events of the last several days. His question had been how much more they could take. This was only the beginning, and he couldn't imagine enduring the next few years. He would lose more comrades, and at an accelerating pace. His rage had not abated, but he had been able to somehow tuck it on a high deck behind a pup tent in his brain. Still longing for the privilege of being used in Carpathia's demise, he had to admit he was grateful for what he had seen that night. He was way past where he could deny God's forceful presence during this period. But to stand face to face with the horsemen of Revelation, to walk right through them to safety. Had the horsemen been blinded to the believers as well? Surely, like the demonic locusts, they were agents of Satan who would rather kill believers than enemies of God. Rayford still wasn't sure what he thought about Leah. She was difficult to identify with. Something about her seemed younger and more naive than her years. They had been through a horrifying ordeal together, and yet his image of her as too strident and opinionated had not faded. He had been moved by her salvation account and did not doubt her sincerity. Was it sexist to be repulsed by her straightforwardness? Would he pass the same off as mere spunk in a man? He hoped not. Rayford inventoried his injuries. He needed another long, hot shower. A toe throbbed and might be broken. His left knee ached as it did before surgery in college. His left elbow was tender. A finger was sprained. He felt a bump on the back of his head. Too bad he was pushing 46. Running into someone and tumbling to the ground was part of a typical day for a 9-year-old, and he was stricken with thoughts of his son. Ramey had been 12 when he disappeared in the rapture. Though Rayford had largely succeeded in refraining from pining over him, Ramey was always at the edge of his consciousness. He suffered the guilt of time lost, wasted, not carved out for his son. The memories of the times they had spent together brought a lump to his throat. Rayford slid off the couch and onto his knees, thanking God for Irene and Ramey, grateful they were spared this torturous existence. He also thanked God for Amanda, whom he had enjoyed for such a short time, but who was no less a gift. Chloe, Kenny, Buck, Tyson, Mac, David, Bruce, Ken, they all came to mind and brought emotion, regret, gratefulness, worry, hope. Rayford prayed he would be the kind of leader to the tribulation force that God wanted him to be, and he still held out hope that this somehow included his being in the proximity of Nikolai Carpathia 3.5 years from the beginning of the tribulation, just 4 months hence, and Carpathia had just announced where he would be. Mac was grateful Abdullah supervised the fumigation and inspection of the aircraft. His head pulsated. He still had to fly, but he would rely on Abdullah more than ever. Everyone, himself included, seemed jumpy, keeping their eyes open for danger. Mac found himself starting at any moment in his peripheral vision, fully expecting to see the giant horses and riders. Abdullah appeared just as edgy. Despite his trauma, Fortunato appeared eager to get going again. Carl was particularly agitated, alternately crying and bustling about to make certain everything was just so. As Mac and Abdullah walked through their pre-flight routine, Fortunato was ushered into the gleaming car terminal. He emerged in fresh clothes, apparently having also showered and looked 100% better. Concern still clouded his face. He stopped by the cockpit to be sure Mac and the plane were flight-worthy. At the first unpleasant odor, I want this plane on the ground, he said. At 1 p.m. in New Babylon, David Hassid finally got a break from his emergency duty. He had helped transport bodies to the morgue and ferry the ill to hospital rooms. He had not seen what had wrought the catastrophe, but he put 2 and 2 together when reports poured in of death from fire, smoke, and sulfur. Nowhere near a tenth of the GC employee population had been affected yet, but still hundreds had died. He knew his stateside comrades, at least Rayford and a new Tribulation Force member, had seen the horsemen. He felt better knowing he was not the only believer who had not seen them. David was frantic about Annie. He had not seen her since the first alarm sounded, sending all personnel into pre-assigned emergency roles. He couldn't reach her by phone or computer, and no one had seen her. Her duty in an emergency was to punch a series of highly encrypted numbers into a remote control box that secured the hangar. Once that was accomplished, she was to account for all staff in David's department. The hangar had been secured, but David had to check on staff himself. It was grisly work. Of 140 people under his supervision, 10 were dead, 2 were treated for smoke inhalation, and 1 was missing, Annie. 3 of the dead had appeared to spontaneously combust. During the awful task, David came to a conclusion. If Annie had somehow survived, he would make public their feelings for each other. He would even take the initiative to get her transferred per policy, so it wouldn't appear a reprimand of either of them when it came through channels. Once his report was filed, David ran past dozens of employees who sat in clusters, crying, talking, commiserating. They would have been right for praying with, for sharing God with, but he was not yet prepared to sacrifice his potential benefit to the cause. At his level of security clearance, David was able to obtain a key to Annie's quarters. She was not there. Despairing, he strode to the expansive hangar and entered the code necessary to disengage the security locks. The huge side doors slid open to reveal the cavernous innards, which looked even bigger with the flagship aircraft away in service. The choppers and few fixed-wing craft didn't begin to fill the building. David opened Annie's, Max, and Abdullah's offices and flipped on the lights. Nothing. But that's when he heard it, the muffled, rhythmic pounding. It came from the utility room at the far corner of the structure. He soon recognized the thumps as Morse code. Someone was banging out an SOS. David broke into a sprint. The utility room was double insulated for noise and steel reinforced for safety. This had been Annie's first time securing the hangar. Maybe she didn't know the utility room self-locked from the inside and was the last place a person wanted to be while remotely locking down the whole building. Once that room was locked, communicating from inside was impossible. Phone and even the remote control unit would not transmit past the heavy steel. To get out, someone inside had to first be discovered. David reached the door. "Who goes there?" he hollered. "David," came Annie's frantic reply. "Get me out of here." "Thank God," he said, unlocking the door. She leapt into his arms, enveloping him so tight he had to fight to breathe. "Learned something about the utility room today?" he said. "I thought I'd be in here forever," she said. "I checked the utilities and started punching in the codes as I was heading out, not realizing the doors would lock from inside. I've still got to account for your staff." "Done." "Good. Thanks for telling me about the utility room." "Sorry, I'm just relieved I found you." "You're relieved? I was scared to death. I imagine you could go days without thinking to look in here." David could tell Annie was truly angry with him. "It was actually Mac's place to tell you about." She looked askance at him. "Don't tell me you're a finger pointer. This seems like a major thing you could have told me." He had no defense. "So what was the big emergency?" she said. "Another false alarm? You really don't know?" "How would I, David?" she said. "I saw people running and heard a few coughing when I saw the alert. I came straight here." "Come with me," he said. They sat in her office, where he told her the whole story. "I could have helped," she said. "I look like a coward thanks to you. I just about died worrying about you," David said. "I thought I knew what you meant to me." "You thought? I was wrong. What can I say? I need you. I love you. I want everybody to know." She shook her head and looked away. "You loved me enough to let me lock myself in?" Now David was angry. "Did you read the procedure manual like you were supposed to? It's clear." "I suppose I'll get reprimanded." "Probably. It's going to be hard to hide that I did your work." "It was the least you could do," she said. David fought to attribute her sudden unattractiveness to claustrophobia and frustration. "I love you, even when you're ornery," he said. "That's big for you." He shrugged and turned his palms up in surrender. "I'd better get back. Until you and I declare ourselves, we can't be seen together. For one thing, I have to account for your whereabouts." "That's only fair." He shook his head and rose. "Someone should have told me," she said. He didn't look at her. "I got that point." "I'm just saying," she said, "that I'm the one who could get booted out of my job and reassigned. You know what that'll mean." He turned back. 10 minutes ago, I would have loved that. It would have meant we could declare ourselves and I'd get more time with you." David could tell he had wounded her. "And now?" she said. "Like I said, I love you even when you know the price, David. I want what you want. But what's best for the tribulation force?" I can't be much good to the force, frustrated without you. Who has the access to GC brass that you do? I know. So are we in love again or what? She came to him and they held each other. I'm sorry, she said. Me too. And that's the end of chapter 9. And next we'll be reading chapter 10. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day.